Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition is a special. We're joined by my co-host, who I consider the doctor of the airwaves and the host of Education of the Crossroads, celebrating 25 years. Brother, Professor Basir Mchawi, welcome to Cultural Caravan. One of my executive board members, Miss Soraya Nickens, Dr. Tyrene Wright, she's a scholar, professor, CUNY, Dr. Cole, Shawneladee Cole, welcome to Cultural Caravan. I just want to really focus on the aftermath of the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. As many of you know, on that day, there were a number of white men and women who, after hearing a speech by then President Trump, were encouraged to go to the U.S. Capitol, storm the Capitol, as well as riot, and as resulted with the deaths of 5 people and many of our leaders being forced to hide in bunkers to avoid being victims. We've seen at the result the difference in the treatment of those perpetrators, and I'd just like to ask my co-host to comment on what you thought about what happened.
What happened on January 6th was obviously an attempt by a group of domestic terrorists to overthrow the United States government. They were attempting to try to interrupt the certification of the election, which would have meant that number 45, a bunch of people don't say his name. When I refer to him, I refer to him as Donald Chump as opposed to Trump. He would have continued to be the president if, in fact, they were successful. So, this is something, the last time there was an invasion of the Capitol was actually burned, and that was during the War of 1812. So since that time, nothing of that magnitude had happened. So it's a major piece. It's not anything. There are people in the Republican Party who would like us to believe that the people who were engaged in this activity were somehow patriots. And obviously, that's not the case. These were domestic terrorists. And of course, the question that's on so many of our minds is, well, why are they being treated in the manner that they're being treated?
Dr. Wright, could you please tell us about why you feel that the justice is being handled differently, and what historical perspective can you bring to this conversation?
This country historically is comprised of people who came from the peasant classes of British society in particular. And America, or the colonies at that time, was their first chance and opportunity to have a better economic future than they had in their homeland, where they actually were slaves of a different kind in terms of serfdom tied to their land. So you're talking about the peasant class who came to a country or to colonies where they had the opportunity to have upward mobility that they did not have in their homeland, and establishing something called the culture of whiteness. So that afforded them privilege. America, in essence, historically is an expression of white nationalism. It's interesting that when you look up something like white nationalism or white nationalist in, Webster Dictionary online or Wikipedia or anywhere, you never see as part of the description or synonymous with the word or the term, the founders of this country. And that is what the founders of this country were, white nationalists. America is an expression of precisely that, which is why the so-called insurrectionists, who are really domestic terrorists, use the phrase over and over again that they were taking back their country, which is historically white and male dominated. So I think that's one of the things that's being left out of the context. This is why you have people saying things to the effect that this is not who America is. This is not who we are, whoever they are talking about. The point is that this is very much what America has historically been, okay? Whether you are a person of color, whether you are an African person, whether you are a woman, you were not a part of the initial vision of America.
And when you think about the fact that we, you're talking over after 400 years, a lot of people are, just wondering, oh, we had a black president, we had this and that, black people have made so many strides. Why is it? Why are white males, particular, for white communities, so angry? I mean, what is it when you think about, and I'm going to ask you, Dr. Cole, why has the tempo of the mindset of white America, particularly under a president, a quote unquote president like Trump, what did he do? How did he in particular awaken this type of mindset that, as we said, in an emotion amongst white Americans?
I think he spoke to these different aspects of society that have maybe been quiet for some years. Doesn't mean that activity wasn't going on. It doesn't mean that they weren't having their own organizing. But he allowed language. He had a phrase, "Make America Great Again." And I know that was a question that T.I. asked. Well, tell me when America was great. When was it great for who? So we never got an answer for that. And I think that he knew how to raise a base that would help erase the effects of seeing a black president in office, not 4 years, 8 years, with a black wife, black children, no scandal. So he knew how to speak to a certain population that didn't feel good about themselves as well. And the idea of putting a white male back in office that would speak to issues that would make them feel better about themselves allowed him to push forward with that. And I think he's unleashed something that people think that just by having Biden in office and even Kamala in office can change that, but it's still out there. And there's still so much work that has to be done because it didn't go anywhere, but it was definitely heightened with his efforts.
So when we think about the fact that we have still an undercurrent of seething, angry people who feel entitled, they feel that we should still be on the plantation, that they should be sitting in the houses or the places that we are working, that they're entitled. They're not only seeing us, and as you've seen and witnessed recently with some of the violence that's being perpetrated even amongst Asian Americans as relates to some violence, some horrible things happening, that black people, of course, we know we've been at the brunt of this, but others are now starting to feel it. Talk to us about that, Brother Basir, about what's happening across America where you're having these these lashing out, these fits, okay, that are happening and impacting us and others.
The American dream has become a nightmare. I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about. That the economy for the white male who is, I guess, the main part of the Trump community is not doing well at all. I mean, if you look at what is taking place, we've got a seismic shift in regards to the economy, that we've moved away from the industries that these white males, their families, have been involved in for years. So if we look at, for instance, the steel industry, it's not in the United States anymore. The coal industry. We had Trump talking about clean coal. I mean, what is that? There's no such thing as clean coal. Mm-hmm. So we're in a situation where for instance, the Trump tax cuts. This is something which just transferred money from the lower class, the middle class, to those who are rich. I mean, the Trump tax cuts haven't done anything for people who are working. So what this is that there's and anger. And the anger is Trump essentially promised things which he couldn't deliver. So there's probably a need for them to be mad, but instead of being mad at Trump, they're mad at everybody else, attempting to try to blame other communities for the condition that they at this particular time find themselves in.
You know, when I think about Trump and I think about the type of terror that he, not only amongst even his own people, I mean, he has the Republican Party in check, okay? To the point where despite he can say anything, lie under the sun, he can say the sun was gray, moon, they would say, yes, sir. You know, he threatened I mean, and technically what he did on January 6th is he basically told and I call them Trump's troops, I would say, he told his troops to go out there and attack. You know, that's basically it. He gave them a war cry that people, white folks, just like him, who he felt betrayed his trust, even his own, his vice president was on the hit list. You know, I mean, if it wasn't for Secret Service or others protecting him, Mike Pence, you know, was in jeopardy. His life was in jeopardy and several others. So I guess the fear factor to the point where, you know, that's, I think, been the most interesting but concerning thing is that, you know, you have people, politicians, who basically will do anything because they're fearful of this mass. And I think it's like any bully, he sent his mass out there to prove a point. So that's why sometimes people ask, well, why is it that some of these Republicans will do anything that he says? So talk to Soraya about this sign that we saw, you know, the fear and how the fear in your eyes was to, what message did it send to you?
Republicans have, in the past, they executed something called the Southern Strategy, where they basically took on a Dixiecrat, the former Democrats before they really went to the Republican Party after they got annoyed with Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. Well, they had something called the Southern Strategy where they they sowed white resentment and made it look as if any gains black people seemed to have made or any bones or crumbs thrown in our direction was somehow a threat to them in their upward mobility. And they've taken advantage, and that strategy has worked. It's put people in power and positions of authority who really shouldn't be there, who really aren't doing that much for the people who elected them to office. But as long as it's like in the past, they say a lot of these politicians, whichever one could say the N-word the loudest, got into office. Well, they keep preying on their people's anxieties about black people somehow eclipsing them in America. And that's what all of this is predicated on. All Trump did was he took that and he took it to a whole new level. He simply said out loud what these people were dog whistling. He just said it. And so the people are so overjoyed that they have someone who's saying what they feel in their heart that they're just following him blindly. And again, it's working. And so now these other politicians, even though they may not have said things that way, they feel like there's no way they can go against Trump and win. Look at what happened to Jeff Sessions. You know, he didn't do what Trump wanted him to do when he was made Attorney General. He pushed himself to the side because he felt that Mueller investigation, he didn't want to have control over it, and Trump took his revenge out on him. Not only fired him, but then when he tried to run back for his seat as a senator, he got defeated because Trump deliberately said everything nasty about him and supported his opponent. So this is what the Republican politicians are deathly afraid of. If they talk against him, he's going to talk bad about them, and then people won't vote for them. So they have to follow him. So actually, it's like something that's kind of taking on a life of its own. And I don't know how they get out of this.
One of the interesting things in regards to all of this is that African people, if in fact we have some issues You can't call the police. You can't call the FBI. You know, here it is. You know, we've seen during the Trump administration an uptick in police violence. The FBI historically has been an organization that's been used to destroy our organizations. So if, in fact, we are confronted with these mad people, I'm just call them mad men, what is our community supposed to do? I'm just going to throw that out there.
What should our community do in light of the presence or just the rallying and revving up of these individuals in this country at this moment in time, essentially?
It's a condition, you know, which literally can be injurious to our health in so many different kinds of ways, whether we talk about it in terms of what you were talking about before as far as the health system, but also just in regards to the fact that at some point, you know, some of these people, whether we talk about the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or any of these other groups, will confront us as a people directly.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Basir. But I think one of the things that we have to do is, one, study history. I think it's dangerous for us to not know. If you didn't know prior to this, the history and where you are, as one of my professors used to say, where you are and who you are, I think it's a great wake-up call for what this country truly is about. I think some people have for a long time lived under the illusion that America is for everybody. And if it really were truly for everybody, we wouldn't have evidence of this kind of activity. One of the things that came out recently is that it wasn't just these so-called insurrectionists or rioters or what I would call domestic terrorists. They were in collusion with members of Congress. So it's not just a one-dimensional thing. You know, we can just push them aside and say, well, they're on the fringes, as Trump tried to say, or that's not the average American. No, these are people who are represented amongst the average person in the United States, but they also are represented amongst our political representatives. And that is a problem, right? They're under investigation right now in this country for being in contact and interacting with people who allegedly participated in this domestic terrorist act on January 6th, just the day before, giving tours to individuals who would then be engaged in these attacks on the very next day. And those are members of Congress. So it's pervasive. We need to huddle down in our own communities and get really real about our own rights and our own positions in terms of surviving, okay? The Second Amendment applies to us as well. And I think we need to be very clear and somewhat thankful that the handwriting is on the wall and that people are out.
I guess the question is, under these particular circumstances, which are becoming more and more visible, what should we as a community begin to do? Right.
So I think that we do need to rely on our original structures within our community, within our churches, within our organizations. We were talking earlier about how, as much as we love social media, sometimes it highlights things that we need to have discussion amongst family, amongst our community, that shouldn't be broadcast to the world, because it's basically those conflicts that may happen within our groups are used against us. And we also have to be prepared that there are always going to be people that we consider traitors that will infiltrate. We have to prepare for that. I'm also very curious about what people think about hearing about so many so-called, not only just Republicans or Black Republicans and Black conservatives, but Black Trump supporters, because it seems like it just came out of nowhere. That just wouldn't have been something that most of us would have thought. There were so many people in our community following, and there's more than we really realized. We always have to be prepared that there are people that will infiltrate, and we have to recognize that and plan for how we would address it. But I think we need to rely on our community structures.
I think that we have to realize also that a lot of these type of violent white people, a lot of them hide behind a police badge. They've been allowed to run around and do the things they do because, as you saw with the Capitol riots, they're not really dealt with. The police let them go home and basically look at camera footage later to identify the people. We know, even their own reporters have said that it had that been black people or people, other people of color or Muslims, other people who they're used to criminalizing and degrading, that those people would have been rounded up right there on the spot. They wouldn't have even gotten into the Capitol building. They would have been fired on. So a lot of the reason for these people's behavior is because they know that they're going to be dealt with a very soft hand. And we realize this, we have to realize this too. And we have to come together and decide what we're going to do to help protect ourselves. With the police, there's been people talking about defunding them. There has to be solutions in place that protect us and make them accountable, and also weed out the white supremacists that may be in their ranks. And we can do this if we start demanding this from our politicians. Too many times we have people who are supposed to be mouthpieces for us who are basically saying what someone who's paid them says for them to say. When that defunding conversation came up, all of a sudden these people come out of the woodwork against it in the Democratic Party. And you sit there and you wonder, well, why weren't you speaking when these people, all these incidents against these black people, how come you weren't talking about that so badly then, but now you suddenly find your tongue and you're talking about it? But anyway, long story short, I feel like, you know what? We have to come together. We have to demand that things change, because they can change if we demand it, and realize that the real problem is these people are not going to come directly at us. They will come at us with a badge, but they're not going to come at us in groups like they did at the Capitol unless they're in big numbers and they know they're going to win, because they know something about black people. Black people do fight back. That's why we're in this position. That's why we're not still slaves. That's not why we're not in Jim Crow, because we fight back and we're successful when we fight back.
As we conclude this conversation, I just wanted to give everyone a quick minute to reflect on what lessons that you take away from this experience in terms of planning forward.
Well, as we used to say in the Congress of African People, self-determination. Our people need to express themselves. We need to be in control of our own destinies. Self-respect. We need to actually begin to understand that we are African people and come together. That idea of identity is critical because it's the thing that separates us at this particular point. And it makes absolutely no sense. We are an African people. And finally, self-defense. We need to go ahead and be ready to actually defend ourselves, our families, and our communities. I think those three things are critically important.
I would have to agree with Basir in the sense that we need to fully understand the identity issue, particularly in contrast in relationship to America, because I do think many of our people are very caught up in being part of America as opposed to being in America, and understanding our position and our condition here. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I think organization is key. Organization allows for unity. And unity is the only way to insulate yourself and your community from a society that is hostile. So I think we don't talk enough about how to move in unison, how to move as blocks. And I think that is something that historically we have had to our advantage, be it on the familial level and then on the community level. This is how we have been able to impact change. And then The larger picture is that this is the greatest time. I know we didn't talk about it this time, but this is the greatest time to establish our international ties with our family on the continent of Africa, because this is just not about, X number of African people in America. This is about us connecting with that 1.6 billion people on the African continent who are absolutely part of our family and are in the seat of power.
We need to recognize it doesn't really matter where we're from. By the basis of the melanin in our skin, we are treated in a certain way, regardless of what country we're in. And until we really recognize that, we're still going to be struggling to fight to get an equality that we're asking someone else for that they're not going to give. So we need to work with each other to gain as much power as we can.
Whether we realize it or not, for Black people, especially Black Americans, this is the best time in history for us because we are the best educated, we are the most knowledgeable, we are the most dynamic point in our development because we have knowledge of what in the past you had people who were preyed upon and mistreated and they didn't know what was going on. We know. So this is the best time. With all this knowledge, we can now change things. We can use that education to build ourselves up, to protect our health, to link hands with our brothers and sisters, to help pull them up so that we can all move forward together. You know, you can look at a glass as half empty or half full, but we have so many tools at our disposal, it's just up to us to use them.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in, to write, and to tell a friend. And please visit us on our website at www.ccptv.org. But until next time, Louise Dente saying thank you.